Welcome back to the Making the Madness YouTube channel. Sean back again for another video. This time we're going to discuss North Carolina returning Caleb Love, who had a pretty rough national championship game to say the least, but they're nowhere near the national title game without him because he single-handedly willed them to victory against UCLA in the Sweet 16, and he had a few other blow-up games. He had 28 against Duke, he had 14 against St. Peter's, he struggled against Baylor, and he struggled against Kansas, the two Big 12 teams they played, but he was able to put on big performances when they needed him to, and that's what he does. He can go 1 for 12 and a half, and he can come out and go 10 for 12 in the next half. He's such a streaky scorer, but he's one of the most talented scorers in the country, and he's back for another season alongside Armando Bacot, who announced earlier in the week that he will return for another season, and he could wind up being the National Player of the Year in college basketball. Then you also return Leaky Black, who's utilizing the extra year of eligibility. RJ Davis, who might be the most important player for North Carolina next season, also comes back to run that point guard position. The only departure from last year's team that played any minutes in the Final Four is Brady Manick, who was they're not in the Final Four without Brady Manick. His shooting ability at that 4 spot, and right now replacing him is probably Puff Johnson, and he's not a shooter the same caliber of his brother or the same caliber of Brady Manick. He's made a couple threes, but he doesn't look as comfortable from beyond the arc, and maybe that improves with more reps in game because he hadn't played a ton up until the title game, and he played 17 minutes in that game. He played very well. He kept them in the game at points, but he's going to have a lot on his plate. Maybe they had another stretch 4 from the portal like they did last year, Dawson Garcia and Brady Manick. That's always possible. There's options out there. But if they don't, Puff Johnson's going to be in that starting role. And he was a top 50 recruit coming out of high school. He just dealt with some injuries and finally got it going a little bit later this year. So he's a guy I'd watch out for a potential breakout season if he's given that starting role. But the Tar Heels, the question is, are they the #1 team in college basketball? I say no. I get the argument if you say yes, and I could agree with that too. But I'm leaning Houston. The Houston Cougars are really good, as are the North Carolina Tar Heels. But when you look at Houston, if Marcus Sasser returns, you have Marcus Sasser, you have Jamal Shedd, you have Tremont Mark, you have Jerace Walker, top 10 5-star recruit. And then at the 5, you have Juwan Roberts, who was very good in a bench role this season for the Cougars. And you pair that with how good of a coach Kelvin Sampson is, and Hubert Davis is a very good coach in his own right, but Kelvin Sampson is one of the 3 best coaches in college basketball, probably. So you get the consistency of what Houston's able to always do. You get Marcus Sasser would have been an All-American this year if he stayed healthy. You get Jamal Shedd, who really broke out this year. You get Tremont Mark back from injury. And you get Jerace Walker, Terrence Arsenault, who's probably coming off the bench. But when you compare that to North Carolina, it's so tough picking who should be the #1 team. I think those two in Arkansas you could have an argument for. Arkansas, who has a #1 recruiting class in the country. You have Nick Smith, you have Anthony Black, you have Jordan Walsh, you have Barry Dunning, you have Joseph Pinion. You have so many different options coming in, and then you also could return Jalen Williams. They won't be #1 if Williams is gone, but if he comes back, then you're getting a great defender and a double-digit scorer and almost a double-digit rebounder back next season. So those are really the 3 teams that I think have an argument to be the #1 team in the country. If you have asked 3 different people, they might have 3 different answers. But, I mean, North Carolina, just look at, they lost in the middle of February to Pittsburgh, a very bad Pittsburgh team. And since then, they were able to get really hot, show that talent level that they had the whole time, figure it out, not only make the tournament, but go to the national title game, lead the national title game by 15 against the eventual national champions Kansas Jayhawks. And I feel like that's one thing that's kind of forgotten. Like, North Carolina led 40-25 at halftime against Kansas. They were in control, and that lead evaporated quickly, but they did lead by 15 in that game at one point. It was the biggest blown lead in a national title game ever. Sorry, North Carolina fans. But you have so much talent coming back. Like, the 2 best guard duos in America is no question Caleb Love and RJ Davis and Jamal Shedd and Marcus Sasser. That's what makes these 2 teams so appealing. The guard play is so good. You have the elite defense of Houston that's going to be there every year no matter who's there. You have the elite recruits coming in for Houston. And you have North Carolina who's running it back besides Brady Manick. Like, had they won the title, who knows what ends up happening. Does Bacot come back? Does Love come back? But they fall just short, and now they have most of their team. Everybody that was able to come back came back. And you have other guys like Kerwin Walton, who didn't play much this season, but he had a really good freshman year. Can he get a little bit more of a role this season? He's a lights-out shooter. He only checked into the game briefly in the title game, It was after DeJuan Harris stepped out of bounds in the final seconds, and they got the ball back. Then they called timeout again, and Justin McCoy, who's also still on the roster, checked in for Kerwin Walton. So I'm not sure if he officially checked in, but he was in the game briefly, and he was, I think he officially checked in. He just didn't get any actual playing time. So you have him back, you have Justin McCoy back, you have Dontrez Styles back, who, if he made a huge three against Baylor, that Baylor game where they blew the massive lead, he made a big-time three that got the momentum back in their direction. So that was a big-time moment for Styles, another former high-end recruit. You get DeMarco Dunn, who only played, like, garbage time minutes this season. He probably still won't have a huge role this year considering Caleb Love and RJ Davis is back, but if one of them gets in foul trouble or one of them gets hurt, it's always good to have a reliable guard option off the bench in DeMarco Dunn, another former top 100 recruit. So when you have all those pieces returning, I think you have a very good argument for being number one, and if they're ranked number one when it comes time for November or late September, I guess, when the official AP Top 25 preseason poll releases, I won't be against that at all. If they enter the Champions Classic ranked number one, that's more than fine with me. But I have Houston personally. And now let's talk about the ACC as a whole a little bit. You have North Carolina 1, of course, because they might be the number one team in the country, which means they're number one in the ACC. And after that, what do we have? We have Duke, number 2. You get a loaded recruiting class, but you lose so much of your team. Keel's gone. Wendell Moore, gone. Theo John, gone. Mark Williams, gone. Paolo Banchero, gone. Coach K, gone. But you know what you do get? You get an elite recruiting class. You get Kyle Filipowski. You get Derek Lively. You get Jeremy Roach back. So you get some elite recruits. I think they have the second best recruiting class in the country, only behind Arkansas, who I mentioned earlier. So they have a lot of elite talent coming in, a lot of future NBA players, and they get a reliable point guard in Jeremy Roach back, who really started showing his talent during the NCAA tournament. He had lost his starting job there for a minute, but got it back late. And he really helped them get to the Final Four when they needed him most, made some big shots, especially against Michigan State in the round of 32. So you get him back, but the ACC is going to be significantly better in the regular season this year than they were last year. Look at Miami. I might have them in the back end of my top 25, maybe just outside if Isaiah Wong comes back. If Isaiah Wong potentially back, you have Nigel Pack, you have Jordan Miller, you have Anthony Walker. There's a lot of pieces on that Hurricane squad that I like quite a bit. Nigel Pack could be an all-ACC first-team kind of guy. Wake Forest, if Jay LaRavia is back, you get him. You get Davian Williamson. You have a lot of pieces on it. Cameron Hildreth. You have a lot of pieces there, and Steve Forbes will probably hit the portal again and add a few more pieces. But the two teams that intrigue me most, I would say, are two teams that missed the tournament this year and were a big reason why the ACC was not that good this year. Virginia, who was ranked in the preseason, they did not live up to those expectations at all. They lost to Navy on opening night, and they do return Jaden Gardner, Kihei Clark. They added Ben Vonderplas. So they've added some pieces. The shooting should be a little better. Vonderplas isn't an elite shooter, but he's a solid shooter. He's an okay shooter. And based on what Virginia had last year, you can take okay shooters. But when you have Tony Bennett as your coach and you have another year with the players that you had last year, essentially, I think they'll be able to figure it out and get it going a little bit. Gardner's going to be their best player. Maybe they add a little more from the transfer portal, but you have a fifth-year starter in Kihei Clark at the point guard spot. And then the other team I'm mentioning is Florida State, who their 3 freshmen, Matthew Cleveland, Jalen Warley, and John Butler, didn't really have great seasons, but those 3 could come back, and if they do 100% come back, then I think that's a big thing for the Seminoles. You have Caleb Mills. You do lose Anthony Polite potentially. Malik Osborne's gone, but you have a lot of pieces coming back, and you added Darren Green from the transfer portal, transfer out of UCF. So Florida State should be pretty solid. I'm liking what I'm seeing with the ACC, but North Carolina is the best team in the ACC. They might be the best team in the country. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, as I talked about which teams could be ranked number 1, discuss the ACC a little bit, and discuss the North Carolina Tar Heels. Until next time, have a good one.